Well, good evening, everyone. It's great to be with you this evening. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Andrew Musgrave, and I'm the director of the Catholic Social Action Office for the Archdiocese of Cincinnati. And I am thrilled to welcome you here to the third of our three-part series on African American history in rural Ohio. For those of you that have not been able to join us for previous sessions, we had Professor Rick Sheffield from Kenyon College for our first presentation. And then last week, Mary Ann Olding spoke on Carthagena. And this evening, we have Neil Snarr and Peggy Mills-Warner to speak to us about GIST communities. It has been a great pleasure to be a part of this project for a number of reasons, one of which is it was a chance for us to bring together our rural life conferences. We have two rural life conferences, one up in the St. Mary's and Sydney deaneries in the northern part up near Toledo. And then we also have a rural life conference over in our eastern counties in the St. Martin's deanery. And those folks, we run our rural life conference out of our office. And then also we have an anti-racism task force who has been obviously very active, especially in recent months. And this is a chance for us to bring those two somewhat disparate groups together and kind of work together on a project. It's also been wonderful because I am not a native Ohioan, and so this has all been very new to me. And even for those of you who are native Ohioans or those who have been on the previous sessions have shared that they have also been learning a lot in these sessions. So it's a great pleasure to be able to bring all these wonderful presenters together with their decades and decades of experience, knowledge, and passion to share about these really important topics that help us to better understand our history, our shared history here. And by knowing that shared history, it allows us to move forward more informed and more able to be community to each other, to encounter each other in these at times very challenging times. So again, it's been a pleasure to be a part of this, and I'm thrilled to have you all here for this third session. Before we begin, I'd like to say a word of prayer. So if everyone could just take a moment to make themselves aware of the presence of the Holy Spirit, who is with us always, and the awareness that as we are gathered virtually, we still know that God is with us and is bringing us to this space together so that we can learn and that we can better build up God's kingdom here on earth. So in that spirit, and then in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. Good and gracious God, we thank you for all of the many, many blessings that you give to us this day, and for all of the ways that you bless us with our family and our friends, and the ways that you care for us and provide for us in challenging times, but also provide all the many joyous and wonderful times that we have. We ask that you bless this time together here tonight, that you open our hearts and our minds to hear these wonderful messages of our history, that you be with Peggy and Neil in their presentations, and that we can be present with them as they share with us. We thank you for bringing us all together, and we pray for all those who history has forgotten or marginalized, and pray that this work may allow us to better honor them, to remember their dignity and their stories, so that we can build on those stories and all the work that they did to continue to build up our community. In your name we pray. Amen. Amen. In the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. We're going to begin this evening. Well, let me just say, this evening we're going to be talking about the GIST settlements that are fascinating to me in the little that I know, and I'm really looking forward to learning more from Neil and Peggy as we go through this evening. We're going to start today with Neil Snarr, Professor Neil Snarr. He taught at Wilmington College for over 40 years, has been retired now for about a dozen years. He has his PhD from Ohio State in sociology. He is a Quaker. He has written for the Wilmington News Journal for 20 plus years, and has also published and edited several books, including a book with his son, who also is a professor at Wilmington College, and they're on their 7th issue on a book on global issues. He has been a longtime writer of articles for Black History Month celebrations. He is happily married to Ruth, his wife, who is from Canada. He has two sons, again, one of whom teaches at Wilmington College, and the other is a vice principal of a local high school. And he is the proud grandfather of 8 grandchildren, all but one of whom live within a few blocks of him. And the other one is out in Pierre, South Dakota, working in public health there. So Neil, we are so grateful to have you here with us this evening, and I will turn this over to you.
Fine. Thank you so much. I guess we can go ahead with the, yes, this is a PowerPoint really put together by the author of this book, and Paula Wright. And as far as I'm concerned, this is the most thorough and quite excellent book. There are innumerable articles in newspapers and so forth. And there are a few what I would consider scholarly articles. But this is well researched, and it gives a very large overview. I noticed on the cover it says the little known story of the largest relocation of free slaves in U.S. history. I phoned Paula and I said, do you still stand by that? And she quoted a recent master's thesis where they support that. So I'm sure there are a lot of questions about a lot of things. This is 200 years ago, you know. But I think we have to stick with that. It's the largest release, and they came from Virginia, of course. The next page is simply an article in a Virginia academic journal, and it touches on much the same thing. It's by a fellow who was writing a dissertation, and as part of the dissertation, he just wrote this article. Very well researched. The third publication is a little unusual. This was put together by a professor at Wilmington College. By the way, the relationships are with the Highland County primarily. Peggy is the expert elsewhere. The title of this is They Followed the North Star to Guest Settlement 1810 to 1885 when it was published. This contains some very interesting things about individuals. A professor from Wilmington College went to England to look into the documents related to Samuel Guest, and he writes an article in that. Also some interesting pictures about the site, which we'll cover bits and pieces. The next page is simply indicating the distance between Cincinnati, or nearby, of course, the guest settlements, and Roanoke, Virginia. And you get a lot of information. A straight line distance, 278 miles. Driving distance, 378. I tried to determine how long it took for those groups of people to move that almost 400 miles in about 2 years. So one thing we find very different estimates is the number of people who made the trip. Many children were born on the way and many adults died. So that's a good indication of the contradictory numbers you sometimes receive. Next page, Andrew, if I can get to it myself. Simply the counties of Ohio, and you can see down south west. See Brown County, and then Highland County above that, and then Clinton County. And if we have some time, I'll talk about Clinton County. I feel like I wrote some very interesting bits of information about racism in Clinton County back in the 20s. Okay, the next, just an introduction, guest settlement, home to the manumitted slaves of Samuel Guest. By the way, 2 years ago, a book came out about Samuel Guest by a British historian. And I just got it about 2 days ago, so I haven't read it. But it's about his whole life, and there are some very interesting bits and pieces. The next page, Samuel Guest, 1723 to 1815. Through the terms of his will, British absentee landowner Samuel Guest freed his 350 Virginia slaves and provided funds for their relocation, the purchase of land and homes, and the establishment of schools and churches. And I might say he had a specific church in mind, of course, Church of England, the Episcopal Church. A trust was set up under the jurisdiction of the state of Virginia, executed by Agent William Wickham and Carl Page, Ohio Quaker agent Joshua Woodward, Levi Warner, and Enoch Lewis managed the Guest Trust and cared for the needs of the Guest settlements in Brown and Highland County. I might say there's a lot of talk in this book, and there's a lot of talk about early Guest people experience and Quakers. But I need to make a very important distinction. Quakers today, and I'm a Quaker, Quakers today certainly do not commit themselves to social justice like they did 100 years ago or 200 years ago. There was a separation in 1828 referred to as the Hicksite separation. And the Hicksites essentially have diminished significantly. There were two particular meetings. We traditionally, Quakers refer to their meeting organization as meetings. There was Fairfield near Leesburg, and then there was one very near Clinton County, just across the border. And they were very active. They visited these settlements, and another settlement that you may not have known about, the Bray settlement. Bray, if we have time, I will go back to that. But Bray released his slaves also from Virginia, smaller numbers for sure, and they ended up in the southeastern part of this county, Clinton County. There you see the historic markers, the two in Brown County and the one in Highland County. Historic markers placed in 3 guest settlements. By the way, it's G-I-S-T and it's pronounced G-U-E-S-T. And when you look back in the history of the word, it was essentially guest at one time. It ended up being guest, pronounced as guest. Settlements in Ohio, Brown County established 1819, and that was the largest group of slaves, and 1821, and then Highland County in 1830. Next. Now we get into information that Peggy would be much more familiar with. The map shows the names of ex-slaves from 2 different counties in Virginia. And Guest had at least 3 plantations, and he was certainly a culpable person. He grew up in England as a homeless child, did very well, but let's face it, he became wealthy being a slave owner. Land consisted of about 2,000 acres, but you get different numbers on the amount of space also. One problem in some of these recorded plots, only the first name of the freedman was listed, and so that complicated so many things. Often the plots were not delineated. Next, Andrew. This is a letter on their way, Washington, Pennsylvania, where they would have passed through. And this was in a newspaper. On Thursday last, 58 free Negroes passed through this place from Virginia under the care of Mr. Crew on their way to join a settlement of the same description of persons formed sometime since in Brown County, Ohio. They formerly belonged to the estate of Mr. Samuel Guest, who at his decease several years ago in England, manumitted his slaves in number about 900. Well, there were not 900 at all, nothing like that. Leaving them by will properly to the immense amount of baggage. They had with them 3 wagons to carry their baggage and so forth. While here, they behaved quite well, orderly, and they seemed to appreciate fully the philanthropic view of their late master in setting them free. And this appeared June 30, 1821 in the Niles Weekly Register, published in Baltimore, Ohio. I don't know anything about that at all. Next page, a map of Brown County. The lower settlement, the 2 settlements are identified as lower and the upper. And this is 1821. The map shows the names of the slaves from Hanover County, Virginia, because from Hanover they went to one site and so forth. Land consisted of, again, acres, over 1,000 acres, lying upon the waters of White Oak and Straight Creeks. It's important to realize that the expectation of Guest was that these people these released slaves would continue living in Virginia. And he had all plans for schools and agriculture and really taking care of them. But it was rather naive because it was impossible for them to stay in Virginia. If they were in Virginia for 1 year, they revert to being slaves. He didn't understand that. So his plans were rather naive. And they were not prepared to go to Ohio, to live on their own, become independent farmers. And there were so many things for which they were not prepared. In order to transport Guest slaves issued by the Superior Court of Richmond, Virginia on March 18th, 1830, the ex-slaves did not arrive in Highland County, and this is the 3rd group, until 1832. 2 years. Records show that 44 freedmen were moved to Ohio in 1832. In the 1850 census, this settlement shows 18 families living in this settlement. Next page, map of the Highland County guest settlement. 1894 map surveyed by Duckwall showing the names of the slave descendants. By the way, teaching at Wilmington College and in Wilmington, Highland County, Clinton County, there are still a lot of descendants of the people who were brought from Virginia in the early 19th century. Lots were assigned to slave descendants according to where the residents were living at the time. So the assignment came later. Lot 30 was set aside for Penn Township Board of Education to be a school. You keep running across the word Penn. That's William Penn. William Penn was a Quaker. And you find Penn used in several different ways, locations, streets, and so forth. The Lot 31 was set aside for guest settlement for Cemetery Association. I don't know what in the Brown County, I really don't know about the cemeteries. But cemetery in the Highland County site is well cared for, and a high school group from Washington Courthouse did a study of those. And so it's well cared for, and you can read. And many of the men participated in the Civil War. Quaker involvement with the guest settlement. Being a Quaker, it makes one quite pleased to see how Quakers were so involved. I'm afraid we cannot boast for that sort of thing now. But throughout, at one time, I counted the number of times in that small book that Quakers are mentioned as just permeated with Quakers. They assisted these people in every way reasonable. They tried to visit them every month. They would take their concerns to the government people in Highland County. They would buy books for the schools. They would hire teachers, and just innumerable tasks they undertook. And another problem with them, all of them moving to Southern Ohio, is they did not find neighbors who supported them, except for the Quakers. I mean, most of the settlers in Southern Ohio were from Virginia and Kentucky, and they were not welcoming at all. So there are so many things wrong. Plus, the agricultural land was really very poor. That small plot of 200 plus acres in Highland County was really quite a bit better than the other. Quaker involvement, Fairfield monthly meeting in Leesburg, Ohio, formed the Committee for the People of Color about 1860. This committee was devoted to the moral and literary improvement of the people of this settlement. Quaker families in the area were also involved with the Underground Railroad, helping runaway slaves escape to freedom. Guest settlement was used as a station on the Underground Railroad, hiding slaves until they could move on to safe locations. Guest trust is liquidated. This is a very important event. Virginia courts relieved Agent Wickham of his duties in 1847 as administrator of the guest trust. Highland County Common Pleas Court was given jurisdiction over the guest trust through an act of the Ohio General Assembly, signed in February of 1851. Next page. And Ohio and agents dismissed of their duties for the 2 Brown County settlements. This is very, very important. They were not given legal ownership of their property. The reason they were not given is for fear that they would lose it, mostly fearful that whites would take advantage and beat them somewhere or another out of their property. But in 1855, the original Ohio trust of the trustees of the guest trust were discharged from their duties, and the properties became legally the members of the people living on the property. That didn't bode well for the settlement. People were not treated well. They were not making a good living so often. It was really very unsatisfactory land for agriculture. A letter from Joshua Woodward, written to Dr. Bailey, Georgetown, a respected friend of my friend and me, Quaker. I received that letter. You hear the thee and thy, that's old Quaker talk. Dated 31st of last month, in due time. I'm sorry to understand that some of the guest people are in a disagreeable situation mentioned. I have a few dollars left in this estate in my hands and only a small balance of money that was sent out to pay the tax of their land. By the way, they did not have legal access to the land, but they had to pay taxes on it. A lot of injustices, a lot of questionable things. The conclusion of the works I have read indicate, however, that the people in charge of the lands, mostly Quakers, did not take advantage of what they had. But I don't want to take all of Peggy's time. Highland County guest settlement residents take action. So here we are, long time, 200 years later, they still don't have the legal documents from their property. There have been all kinds of efforts doing that. Lawyers have been contacted in Cleveland and elsewhere, and essentially people have given up. There's no way for the Highland County residents of the guest settlement to get legal title to their property. 48 Samuel Turner, Osro Turner, and William Rollins. The Turner and Rollins are the most common names. And in fact, at the college, I had 2 Rollins students at some time. Attorney Alexander Martin of Cleveland to represent them in a lawsuit claiming the state auditor, Common Police Court of Highland County, and the Virginia court for over 100 years of persistent manifest attempts to defeat and destroy the guest settlement. Attorney Martin relinquished Highland County court control over the trust. Here's a map of Highland County, and up in the corner here is the Highland County guest settlement. Is just a mile or 2 outside of Clinton County, and the town closest is New Vienna, and New Vienna is in Clinton County. The olive leaf, well, for 4 or 5 years, there was an anti-slavery magazine or newspaper published in Clinton County. Is Clinton County a strong Quaker settlement area? supporting social justice. That's not my experience, unfortunately. I know very little about this. It only lasted 4 or 5 years. We do have copies of it. Mostly it relies on articles from other magazines and newspapers anti-slavery. I put this in Nordyke Road. Nordyke was a Quaker family. And this is just around the corner from a extant East Fork Quaker Cemetery, 1809. 1809 was very early. You hardly find anything before 1800. Quakers moving, and Quakers became dominant in Clinton County. How committed they were, good question. A history of Quakers of this that are referred to as Orthodox indicate that the Quakers really become Protestant. They're not the traditional Quakers, the Hicksite Quakers. Highland County guest settlement in decline. Next, there you go. By 1850, old structures were in disrepair. Residents neglected to pay taxes and were evicted. Residents would come and go, leaving property in poor condition. Well, I won't spend much time with this. There were members of the guest settlement, the next one, Andrew, who became involved in the Civil War, and that is documented to some extent, not nearly as much as it should be. And if you would visit, you would see that cemetery, and here you can see there are a large number of burials there. 94 headstones were located. 24 stones were illegible. Now here's the Carthaginian Church. Carthaginian seems to be a very popular word for these people. Sister Merle was the minister there. She was the mother of one of 2 students that I had, and she was an absolutely wonderful person. She came to me to talk about religion one time. I won't tell you what we talked about. But this is the Carthaginian Church, and it was built and it was destroyed 2 or 3 times. It is unused now and has been for at least a decade. Sister Merle held this for maybe 3 decades, something very close to that. It was a fully racially integrated church. I mentioned the one professor from the college who went to England. He used to have a course visiting different religious groups, and he always went to the Carthaginian Church. The next page is some buildings, and the one at the bottom, the more livable one, is where Paul Turner lived. And Paul died about a year ago. I went to his funeral. Here's a photo of him taken, I might say, by my granddaughter. Current owner of 206 acres, is Paul Turner. He is committed to preserving the settlement as a historic site. And Paula Wright and her friend Melissa Bell are working, and that land is set aside, and someday it will be some sort of a historic site. Certainly that's at this point undetermined, but the lands have been, what was left on the land has been sold now. And a letter from Melissa Bell Byring. And Melissa, to a great extent, by herself, was able to get that land in the hands of Paul Turner. Now he's dead. Now the property will eventually be turned into some sort of a historic site. Paul Turner's farm and the guest settlement in general is still in the estate process. And this is just a few weeks ago. I got this from Melissa. Well, I hope I didn't infringe on Peggy's time. Peggy has a very different experience with this than I do. And I keep repeating that this is really not my research. It is mostly those two women who selflessly have spent their time, and I want to know more about them. I sort of decided they're secular saints, but I don't even know that for sure. But they certainly have spent their lives bringing to the surface the guest settlement in Highland County. And I'll turn that over to Peggy.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Snarr. It was very interesting, a great introduction to Samuel Guest, to his kind of legacy and how he got everything started, and to get a little bit better picture of what Highland County settlements looked like and how they came to be. So thank you again so much for sharing that collected knowledge that you've pulled together. Now we're going to turn over to our second speaker, Peggy Mills Warner. She is a sixth generation descendant of the Gist community. So as Neil said, there are a lot of descendants around, and Peggy is one of them. She's been doing research on the settlements for 25 years, has looked into a number of different names like Toller and Ellis, Hudson, Breckenridge numbers, and of course the Gist name. She lives in Loveland, Mason area and has been in Brown and Claremont counties her whole life. She got her bachelor's in music education from the College Conservatory of Music, University of Cincinnati, and got her master's of education from the same institution. She's a former public school music teacher, taught K-12 for 39 years for Cincinnati Public Schools, as well as Georgetown, Exempted Village, Batavia, and St. Michael's Parish. She's worked for 5 years as the docent at the John P. Parker House in Ripley, Ohio, and she currently serves there as the VP of their House Trustee Board. She's currently in her 58th year of private piano instruction, and she is the proud mother of Ernest Warner, also known as Andy, who's here with us this evening, and the grandmother of 3 grandchildren, Ayana, Elijah, and Theo. Peggy, thank you so much for being here with us.
Well, over my head, I see freedom in the air. Over my head, I see freedom in the air. Over my head, I see freedom in the air. There must be a God somewhere. I'm reminded of that Negro musical when I think about the people and how they came here, and what it would be like to be told that all of a sudden you are free. And then, as Dr. Snarr said, traveling a long distance with that in your mind, that you are going to some place that is going to make you free, especially if you're one of the older ones. And there were some older ones who were probably as old as 50 or 60 years old, who had worked all their lives not free. and then were given the opportunity to think that they would have a chance to have free land. That, of course, is not the title of the song. It's Over My Head, I Hear Music in the Air. But since I make my bread and butter as a musician, I have to bring some of my music out somehow. But it's a beautiful song, and it does remind you and cause you to think about what was it like to be a slave and then all of a sudden to be told that you are going to be free. I want to thank Mr. Musgrave for asking me. We had not met until this. I don't know him from anyone. Don't hold him accountable for me. And Sister Christine, who has become a real inspiration to inspire me to keep going because I didn't feel like I had anything to say at all. And the Horsheimers, who I don't know why they would have ever suggested me at all, but thank you very much. And Dr. Madge Dresser, who is on the line from Bristol, England. There she is. Hi, Dr. Madge, how are you? I'm glad you could stay. I mean, you know the time barrier. What time is it? What time is it?
It's, can you hear me?
Yeah.
It's nearly 1 a.m. So
Well,
I've got to
thanks.
get up early, but it's just a
Don't
delight.
go to sleep listening to this.
You look
But
much more glamorous than I do right now.
Oh, well, I understand though, and I finally get to see you.
Yeah,
Um,
what a pleasure.
She has made connections with me because she's doing some studying about Samuel Gist, aren't you?
Yes, and just the legacy of trying to join up the British and the American stories and see the legacy of slavery today.
Right.
So,
You said the slave travel in Bristol, where you're talking about, was quite a lot. And of course, that's where he went to live and is entombed there in Wormington. And I hope to someday see his little piece that says the tomb of Samuel Gist. And I want to say, I hope my sister's on board. I told her about it from Upper Ohio. And my distant cousin Roy, who I see here, who's from Minnesota, and Roz from California, and of course, Andy, and all my many, many friends, including Martha, my old college roommate. I think that's kind of unorthodox to mention all those people, but there it is, okay? So you were going to ask me what, Andrew?
Yeah. So Peggy and I talked and thought maybe it might work well as a kind of an interview. So we had some questions to offer to Peggy. So the first question is to just say, when did you realize, how did you realize that you were a descendant of the guest settlements?
Well, I'll ask my son to show the first slide. That's of my mother. My mother, a great Georgetownian, had told me the story. And of course, she had been told it by her father. I give you a picture of her in about her 50s. And then here's a picture of her earlier. In fact, that picture is of all, it comes out of a picture of all of the Gist settlement descendants who were members of, now you have to be from Georgetown to know what I'm talking about. This came out of a picture of people standing in front of the Delaney Chapel AME Church down next to the Renta Center on State Street in Georgetown, Ohio. Now we'll have a show of hands. Who knows where that is? Not hardly anybody. But anyway, that Delaney Chapel Church is no longer there. In fact, in Georgetown, Ohio, there are no African-American churches left at all. And there were two very, very, very prominent African-American churches, the Baptist Church and the Delaney Chapel Church out, one on State Street and one on right next to the Grant Schoolhouse, which is still there. You know, I believe in divine intervention. And I think that there are times when God wants a story to come through, and the story did remain true from my grandfather. My grandfather, if you'll show my grandfather, Andy, was the father of my mother. And as this was told to me, that one day a reporter from the Cincinnati Post and Time-Star was roaming around through the rural areas, getting stories about people who were not important people, but people that he wanted to write stories about in rural lands. And by the way, this is the only picture we have of my grandfather. So we're very thankful for this picture. It shows him on a stack of wood that I can still remember, was right near the lane that went into his house. He was a very hard worker. He worked so hard that when he would come to visit us, he never really sat down. He just kind of was talking and talking, said, I've got to go and do this. I've got to fix this fence. Got to get these cows someplace. And he would always have something to do. My mother told me he was a well digger, and he was a pond digger, and a farmer, and many other jobs. But he worked very, very hard. In fact, my sister and I were talking the other night. He worked until the day he died because he had a stroke, because he had an open ulcer on his leg, and he never would stop working. So he had to have it operated on. And during that operation, he had a stroke and never overcame that. He was the father of 10 children, and his wife lived on the guest settlement also. So Granddad Toller's wife, Nona, grew up as a part of the Johnson family. And that will be a prominent family you'll see on the map when we see it. So Granddad lived to be over 91 years old, and he never left the guest settlement except for visits. So his whole lifetime was on the guest settlement, as was his wife. His whole lifetime was on the guest settlement, doing different things. And he raised his 10 children with what he could do from farming and from the well digging. When I lived in the guest settlement, a couple people called me up and they said, you know, there is a well on our farm that your granddad dug. Did you know that? And I said, no, I didn't know that. And so there are, if I take the time to find, there are several wells up in that Sardinia, Fincastle, Five Points area that he did dig. So that is how I found out about the guest settlement, Andrew.
So that's great. It's obviously, I anticipated you'd have a lot of stories that came down through oral tradition, and that certainly makes sense that that's how you would have found out about it as well. So you're sixth generation, which means your grandfather was fourth generation, which means that your great grandparents would have been in the original settlers of the guest settlements?
That's right. If you'll show the chart, Andy, this is the way I hand wrote it. So it's been handwritten. You'll see, and I'm going to show another map, just like Dr. Snarr showed a map. We'll show the plot and everything that this group of people came from. It will show lot number 22, where Betty, I feel she was a young lady in her 20s, came with her 4 children she brought with her. Sally, Anthony, who was my great grandfather, Sally, Harriet, and Izzy or Kizzy. We have this, scrawl of the K's and the I's in that kind of writing. So we're not sure whether that was an I for Izzy or a K for Kizzy, but that was the 4 children she brought. We feel Anthony was not 12 years old yet, between 10 and 12 years old when he came, and they were brought here in 1819. Then his son, one of his sons, he had several sons, was Hamer, probably named after Senator Hamer. We don't know, but probably named after Senator Thomas Hamer. And Hamer begot James, who was his firstborn. James you saw on the pile of wood. James had 10 children. James and Nona had 10 children. One of them, Edna, my mother. And then you know the rest of the story. There are 9 generations because I have older cousins. And in fact, mother was in the middle of the 10. somewhere in the middle, so that there were lots of brothers older than her. Not all of them had children, and some of them died very young. She had one died in West Virginia in the coal mines. So some of them went out wherever they could to work, and Uncle Virgil was in the coal mines and contracted that lung, whatever you get from breathing in the coal mines. So the 9th generation, I'm sure, is here, and I don't think there is a 10th from what I have studied. And I'll show you the book that I have written as of a study of that. So if you'll show the next slide, I'll show you the same. This is the same sketch. We didn't know both of us were going to be showing those. I do want to call your attention to where it does say July of 1819, 1,197 acres. Now this came out of the Brown County Courthouse. It's logged there. We never had any trouble like the Highland County people have had trouble getting maps of what the acres really are. But this came right out of Brown County Courthouse. It's logged there. And the notation says, the Black people's land from Gooch Land and Amherst counties, Virginia, situated on the waters of Brush and White Oak Creek. So we know where that land was to be. There were 31 lots. There must be something about the name 31, because all of these plots of land seem to be in 31, whether they're large 31 or small, because if you're dividing lots up in Highland County of 207 acres into 31 plots, they're not going to be as large as dividing this one in Upper Brown County, meaning the upper parts up near Fincastle and Sardinia, into 1,197 acres is what they were given, into 31 plots. That, of course, is going to make bigger plots. Some of them as small as 18, and some as large as 70 or 80 acres. If you'll show the next slide, this is I wanted to tell you that first one can be found off of 5 Points Fincastle Road. If you're traveling down the Appalachian Highway, you take a left onto 5 Points Fincastle Road and you go right into that area. Just imagine 1,100 acres of all that area. So, and this one, the lower, or in this map, it just says guest settlement lying upon the waters, but it's sometimes referred to as a lower guest settlement in Scott Township, was 1,120 acres, making a total given them of over 2,300 acres of land. This happened in July 29th, as it shows at the bottom, July 29th of 1819. This notation has, this tells you specifically where they were, the lots belonging to the Black people from Hanover County. So we've got 3 counties going here, Hanover and Goochland and Amherst. And this lies along, it says lies along the waters at the top of White Oak and Straight Creek. So White Oak is that common creek that extends into both of the settlements. And as my dad always said, there's a fast way to get from one place to the other. And it's not by taking, this is off of Route 68. It is 10 miles south of Mount Orb, if you've ever heard of Mount Orb. And it would go off onto the streets of White Oak Valley, and also the road that runs past the little store and goes to Hamer Road. And there are some of these acres that were also off Hamer Road. That is the location, and you were going to ask me the location and the size of these lots. You probably don't want to hear a lot about Samuel Gist right now, since, and then you can show the next slide, honey. That is our lot, the lot 22, Betty, Sally, Anthony, Kitty, and Harriet. But the next slide will tell you a little bit about an elementary teacher's handwriting. Sorry about that. Everyone always asks, who is Samuel Gist? Now, I want to tell you right now that mine comes from two different sources than Dr. Snarr. There is a book who talks so much, this book has so much written about Samuel Gist. It's called The Fabulous History of the Dismal Swamp Company. It's by Charles Ralston. And it's like many parts of it are narratives, because he talks about all the business associates of George Washington. And the other book I used was called Migrants Against Slavery by Dr. Philip Schwartz. Dr. Philip Schwartz, until a couple years ago when he passed away, was a professor at the Virginia Commonwealth. And he also had a student named Michael Trotty. And Dr. Snarr showed you the pamphlet that Dr. Trotty has written for his dissertation, I think it was. I've met both of those men. They have quite a lot of knowledge of the Gist settlements, and I recommend either one of those books. And very quickly, because I know we are running large, Samuel Gist was an orphan boy, raised as an orphan boy. Charles Ralston in The Fabulous History of the Dismal Swamp says that he knew his father's name was John and his uncle was Thomas, and he was a weaver, but there was really no reference to them because Samuel Gist grew up in what they called a charity school. We would call in America probably an orphanage. They saying that every morning at 5 o'clock, the boys got up and they had a breakfast of table beer and bread. Not very interesting, is it? And they were raised to know reading, writing, similar, just the bare minimums until their teenage years when this orphanage decided that they should go out and be apprenticed to different places. So Samuel was apprenticed to a place in America, the John Smith Plantation. And this John Smith Plantation was in Hanover County, one of them, but the most prominent was there in Hanover County. And he was used as a shopkeeper or someone, in plantation areas, they had to have a local plantation that carried all their goods and sold it to them and kept them. And so this place, the Smith Plantation, where Samuel worked, was the local place where people came and shopped and got the things that they needed. So Samuel Gist, when he was, the book varies, but I would say 13, 14 years of age, worked there in this, learning the things that you would learn as a shopkeeper and as a person who handled money for John Smith and his wife, Sarah. Now, this is a story that I have often thought should be taken by somebody who has deep pockets and made into a movie because it has a lot of drama. To be an orphan and to not have any money at all and be brought to America. And he wasn't proud of America either. He was not an America lover. He thought that Americans were kind of like dirt farmers. The real people were the English, right, Dr. Madge? They're the people that live in England. They're the real people. And so he was not happy here, but he tolerated it because when he was 20 years old, plantation owner John died. And he left his widow, who obviously wasn't able to take care of herself, because within 2 years, the book says, they were married. She married Samuel Gist, and Samuel Gist inherits all of her goods. Her 2 boys that she had with John Smith, he becomes guardian of, and all the things they inherited from their grandparents, who were the Masseys. And then Samuel Gist, who some people feel did not live in America, Ralston says lived here to have 2 girls, Mary and Elizabeth. And then he decides he's leaving for the great, great, great UK, because to be an Englishman was far greater than to be a dirt farmer. And he wasn't happy that the Revolutionary War was coming on either. And he had a person that lived down the street called Patrick Henry. who often socialized with his daughters and had a lot to say about America and how proud he was of America. And that really rattled Samuel Gist too. So he decides he's going to go back to England, and he does. He sets sail, goes back to England, and the year after he wanted to send for his girls and send for his wife, he was going to send for them. They made arrangements that she wanted him to purchase her a nice kettle, that she was in need of a beautiful new kettle. And so they had arrangements that he would send for them. But within a year, Sarah died. And Sarah dies, and that is the end of his coming back. He doesn't come back at all. And the girls are sent for, and they go to live with their dad in England, in the height of wealth in England. They're very happy there until his death, probably about 91 years old. He died. They said that the papers carried his death in January of 1815, and he had left a will close to 50 pages describing how he wanted his slaves freed. And then he had 4 codicils or changes that he had made with it, because laws were changing about slavery, as Dr. Snarr said. So because in 1806, then a law was made that if any slave was set free, then they could not stay in Virginia but a year. And if they stayed over a year, they were slapped right back into slavery. So he knew with the changes in this, things were changing. That's why he had these codicils put to his will. So it was about 18, 15, 16, 17. They're working with this will, and we're probating it. And John Wickham and Matthew Toller are given the job to liquidate the land and bring the slaves to America. The girls were given money, his daughters were given money, but they were told that they would get none, that's 0, of the land in Virginia. Because if that didn't work out, that they would free the slaves and bring them someplace else, then they would free the slaves and let them work on the land in Virginia. But he wanted his slaves, and we don't know really why. I talked this over with the Underground Railroad Freedom Center. They have researched this a lot, and they feel like he just had a change of conscience, possibly because England had a change of conscience. They had been for slavery and then weren't for slavery. We think that might have had something to do with it, but we're not sure why he changed like that and decided that he wanted all of his slaves free. And that little vignette is the story of Samuel Gist, which I think should be made into a movie or at least a documentary.
Sounds like you had a very fascinating life, from a kind of rags to riches, and also with his tremendous change of heart to free the slaves. Obviously, I'm sure not a common thing to do. So that is fascinating. Where, you mentioned a couple of books that you took information from. Were there other resources or other places that you got information?
Well, as I mentioned, the National Underground Railroad Freedom Center. We worked with the first group of people that were down there. The Underground Railroad Freedom Center has really gone through a lot of changes. They've had a group, and then another group came in, then another group came in, but we were with the first group, and they brought us all in and did a lot of research and paperwork. And prior to that, they didn't know anything about the Gist settlements. Now, the Gist settlements are written up in the Parker book, the autobiography, His Promised Land. They're called the Colored Camps. So I do not know why the National Underground Railroad Freedom Center did not know about the Gist slaves. Perhaps they didn't read the book, because there is the notation about the Gist camps in it. And of course, relatives and the courthouse records, genealogy people, I have driven crazy. The genealogy library, I also serve on that board, because they have been such a wealth of information to me that I decided to give back some of my time. I started when my son went to college, being the only child I had this time So I decided I needed to use this time, even though I was working full time. I just need to be busy, 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 busy. So I started to have meetings in my home, and we would pull in people that we knew. Because come to find out, a lot of people that I went to church with and played at their churches, I found out they were guest settlement descendants, and they found out they were guest settlement descendants. So we started having meetings. We had meetings for about 3 or 4 years until we decided to have reunions. And this lady from Springfield, who was in her 90s, she's passed away now. Her husband was a descendant. She wrote a book also. Her name was Ernestine Lucas, and she wrote Wider Windows of the Past and has a whole chapter on the guest settlements. And in 1999, we had the very first gathering. We took some pictures too, if you'll show some of the pictures while I'm talking, Andy. The very first gathering we had, we called it the Gift Gathering. Ernestine said, don't call it a reunion, call it the Gift Gathering. And this was at Woodland Park in Hillsborough, Ohio. And there we are. It was in July. We tried to stick with July because July is when we came here. And then we had another one. There's another picture of another gathering that we had. We have had as many as 150 people. And then the interest seemed to be, we know everything. We don't need to know anymore. So as you notice, Paul Turner is there in the back. And so you can show the next one too. This one has appeared on calendars. And I've seen some in the State Department that have this calendar picture. That's at Cowan Lake. That one was taken at Cowan Lake. We've had it in different places, large enough so that we can get everybody together. It's been so great learning about people that share what happened. We're not all related. Many of us are. But it's great to know that we share this story that our ancestors came here. And as I look through the picture, as I do from time to time, I again think of what do they think? Do they think like I do about that freedom all of a sudden given to them? And many of these people are gone now, but it is exciting to think that we all share this common thing that we were brought here. Are there any more, honey, of the gatherings I put in? Okay. Then we went to Virginia. You can go ahead and show the Gould Hill. Marcia, my sister, and I, before my mother passed away, felt like we wanted to go to Virginia and find out from whence we came. So we went to Hanover County, and this happened to be the biggest of the possessions of Samuel Gist, Gould Hill. Some people call it gold. I call it Gould Hill. That picture is taken from famous houses of Hanover County, Virginia. You can get it on the common market. And we also, in visiting, I'll show you some pictures. We visited Gould Hill and Hanover County in 2001. This is from, and we saw some other things that you'll show the other snapshots. This is this is probably has to been where Samuel Gist worked. That's the home that adjoins Gould Hill, where the tobacco things were stored, where they sold goods. This is typically, it's brick, and typically it could have been here as long as before 1700. It's sturdy. It's built very well. I mean, it really should be on the National Registry, but it isn't. Today, there's another picture too, isn't there, Andy? This is a side view of Gould Hill. I think people expect plantation houses to be large, like Tara in Gone with the Wind, but all of them are not. But this was Gould Hill. Are there any others I forget? This is a side view of the kitchen. Their kitchen was off-site. You know, most kitchens were not in the house. Well, this one wasn't either. This kitchen was off in case there was a fire, they told me. Then the house didn't burn down. So I think you'll want to know the current state of our two Brown County settlements, which aren't as inhabited as the Highland County, but we do have people who have kept their land. As Dr. Frederick Schwartz said when we were talking in Virginia, land was very important to these people, most of them. And if they could, they kept their land. So I would say in the Eagle Township plot, there is as much as 90 to 100 acres of land in the hands of the descendants. However, we do not live there. I left in June, but I still own land. And I do have two cousins who are still there, who live on their land. The Wallsburg, or the one that is on Route 68, that guest settlement, I don't think there is but 1 to 5 acres left in the hands of any of the guest settlement descendants. It would have to be in the family of the Nashes. If you've heard of the Nashes of Georgetown area, it would have to be in their possession, if at all. But Mr. Nash died about 4 years ago, so I'm not sure that his land is still in the state. So we don't have a lot of land like the Turner land and like the inhabitants that live in that other settlement, but we do have a lot of land, I feel, left because people went different places for work. They could not stay there. We have show migrations to Hillsborough, to Wilmington, to Cincinnati, of course. My mother went to Georgetown. I mean, we have people that just went to different places as work got them there.
So are there, as they exist now, are there other kind of similarities or differences to the Highland County, or is that kind of the way, just as you described it, it's mostly been kind of left by the descendants and sold to other folks?
Well, we do have the markers to mark the land.
Oh.
If you will show the markers, Andy, that's the Pamunkey River. Sorry, we didn't get to show you that. Every plantation had a river, and they took us down there to see. We got to walk down the hill to that Pamunkey River. I'm taking the picture, so I'm not in it. And that's the man who owned it in the jeans. And those other two in the khakis are from the Anderson descendants. Anderson was, that's a whole story in itself. Anderson was the husband of the first Gist daughter. And they tried to swindle the Gist estate out of a whole lot of land. So there is a lot of people who maintain the name Anderson. They tell me at the Anderson homecoming, they have as many as 150 people. So those two are from the Anderson homecomings. But if you'll turn on, Andy, you'll see that the markers, we got so many donations, so many people that offered to give money. When Paul and I worked on Paul's marker, they got a stipend from the Ohio History Connection, it's called now. But then as it progressed, these markers were put out in 2009 is the Eagle Township one. And if you'll go on, Andy, it's a two-sided marker. It shows the people's names on the second side. Now, this is 2009, but this one was stolen. These are pictures of the 2009. But somehow this marker got taken out of its pedestal. And one night my cousin came blowing her horn in my driveway and said, "Peggy, Peggy, Peggy, the marker, it's gone, it's gone." And I said, it couldn't be. So we rushed down to the cemetery where it is in the old Methodist cemetery off 32 and found that it truly was gone. Mr. Westmoreland came out from the Underground Railroad Freedom Center. We had the news come out. We offered rewards. We questioned people what would happen to it. Some people were nice about it. One man told me that why was it there in the first place? So we had different attitudes about the marker disappearing. So in 2014, people donated. They said, well, we want you to have that marker. So we're donating money. So the donations came in So in 5 years later, we were able to do another marker, which we don't have a picture of it, but I'll describe it to you. We bricked it. We had a mason come in and attach it with brick right at the bottom where you see the 2000 and the two. It's so that they said nothing is untakeable. If you want to take something, they'll take it. But it's less takeable with brick. So we're happy with that. And then the other one, the Scott Township one, if you'll turn to that one, it is, you see our lot number 22. Scott Township is, as I said, in a little town called Wallsburg. It's in the water towers in Wallsburg. If you go through Wallsburg, don't go very fast because you'll miss it. It's a little hamlet with one store. And off to the side in the water towers are this, and then this is on the back also. It has the names of the people who were given the land. If you'll turn it to the people that were given the land, many people who came here back in 1819. Both of these were recorded in Brown County, July 29th, 1819. Now, due to age and work, people have left, as I said, but they came back for these marker ceremonies. And they come back when we do get together a gathering. So into your question, we don't have as many, but we do have our people caring about their land. In 2000, I want to tell you about my book. If you'll switch to that, I'm kind of hurrying because I looked at my clock. I decided that my folk, not only my relatives, but other people's relatives did not know anything about from whence they came. So I did a little family history thing, self-published it myself, called The Well Digger's Legacy. It tells about my grandfather, who was a well digger and had 10 children. Tells about the descendants of those 10 children, pictures, et cetera, just to give respect and honor to a person who stayed there all his life, who I knew and who I cared a lot about. In 2019, we made an agreement that we would go back for the 200-year anniversary. If you will show, did you add that picture, sweetie? There we are. That appeared in the local paper. How Roy Kay, shout out Roy's he's in the pictures here tonight. And we're distant cousins because my great-grandmother was a Cumberland, and his great-grandmother or his grandmother was a Cumberland also. 7 of us from North Carolina, Minnesota, and Ohio went back to the Hanover County. We tried to make a whole vacation of it. So we went to Scotchtown, which is Patrick Henry's beloved estate, and the Hanover Tavern, where I'm sure Samuel Gist frequented many times, and also that great Patrick Henry, and the Hanover Courthouse, where Patrick Henry had several arguments as a practicing attorney. We went to the 3 sites of the Gist holdings. 2, we could see, of course, the Gold Hill, and the other one, we saw a lane that it said we couldn't go down, and another one we knew where it had been, but it was torn down. We also went to the National Afro-American Museum and Monticello. So that all is in such a historical Virginia thing that we decided to make a let's see Virginia thing out of it. I do want you to know, lastly, that both of these settlements are on the Network to Freedom. They were just recently, enough research was done by myself and the girl who runs the research of that. Carol, what's her name? Carol Stivers, are you still on? She's not on. Anyway, there's a girl who does a lot of research, and she helped me get these 2 settlements on the Network to Freedom of the National Network to Freedom. And we're very proud to have them because they have proven that there was enough Underground Railroad slavery movement in both of those settlements that they belong on the Network to Freedom of the National Park Service. And that's it. I'm sorry to rush at the end, but I know it's getting close and some people are yawning. They're bored.
Well, Peggy, we tremendously appreciate this story as well, to learn about the other side of this, of the guest settlements, from about the Brown County settlements, and how they came to be, and what they've been like, and how you've continued your research. And I think it's a wonderful testament that you've been able to bring together so many folks who didn't know that they were descendants, but to learn that and to come together and to honor those common roots is a beautiful thing. And the work that you all did to get those historical markers there, to honor them and to remember that journey they made, and that journey that they endeavored when they got to Ohio, and trying to make it here against some significant odds and some barriers as well. So it's a marvelous story. Both, you mentioned his guest's life, but also the lives of the folks who came here and tried to settle. So it's a great treasure, and really appreciate you sharing the fruits of all of your research and your experience, and the traditions that have been passed down through your families and others, to share those with us. So thank you very much for all that sharing.
Oh, don't thank me. My pleasure. I want you to read that little note that Dr. Dresser has, that the UK is very interested in this history because of the connection, she said. So we have to really, we have to get the word out. See, he was really a loyalist. He went back to England, and America doesn't know a lot about him. In fact, remember, Roy, when we went to Virginia, I was doing all the talking about Samuel Gist, and they were listening. I mean, I don't know. He just was lost in history, wasn't he? He just was kind of lost.
Well, and to reference the comment you made, I know from what I've been learning about Bristol and the slave trade. Obviously, it was a major port of that, so it certainly stands to reason that there would be the good amount of interest in him and his involvement. And obviously, you said he made a lot of his money through this, so it's very fascinating. So Peggy and Neil, thank you so much for again all that you've shared. We have a few minutes left. We were scheduled to end at 8:30, and we've got about 5-6 minutes left. So I saw several notes of gratitude and appreciation from folks. Are there any questions from anybody about about what they had to share? Sister Christine.
Yes, for Peggy particularly, but there were both of you though talk about the settlements where there were many, many people and several descendants and generations. What happened and what was the climate that changed in Brown County or Highland County where they felt they had to move and leave? You said there were two strong African-American churches in Georgetown at one time. What was the push, pull, or whatever that took them from our areas?
Oh dear, oh dear. You go ahead, Dr. Snarr. Do you have a comment?
I was looking at another site, also released slaves from Virginia that ended up in southeast Clinton County. Up to nearly 300 slaves at one time, released slaves. And there was a question why they just sort of disappeared in about 1860. The answer they gave was that with the end of the Civil War, they felt much more, no, I'm not sure we're talking about the same era. But the end of the Black laws seemed to provide them with some options that they didn't have before. And
Roy, your grandmother and her sister left. You can add something. Why do you think they left?
Well, from what I understand, George Cumberland came to Minneapolis, it had to be right around the turn of the 20th century, And then his two sisters, Bessie and my grandma Luella, followed. And I think part of it was going from a small city to a large city. And also Minneapolis was growing at this time, and people were getting jobs. I mean, my great uncle George was employed and had was living well. And I think that was one of the things that attracted his two sisters to come north. And I think within a year, my grandmother met my grandfather, and they were married, and they maintained their life here. But I grew up with the story about Gist land, and it wasn't called Gist land; it was just called your great grandfather Josephus's land. And I was always told about the apple orchard that was on his land. And this was always a bad story when it came up, because when Josephus died, my grandmother had 4 children, and she just couldn't drop them and go to Sardinia and sort of claim the land. So that's when my family lost their land. It was right after Josephus died, and she was supposed to get it, and she didn't get it, and she couldn't leave to go get it, because we're talking about 1926, 1927. So it was always a sore topic, but it was a topic that we always talked about.
I just think that Ohio is such a border state that it's hard here. It's hard today. I'm sure it was hard back then. If they could do better, they went someplace else, Minnesota, or Upper Ohio. We have a lot of work to do here, Sister Christine. Ohio has a lot of work to do.
Sure does.
Who was
Right.
that? Who was that?
Neil.
That was me. Yes, I did some rather deep research about a woman contacted me, a multiracial woman, who said that her great uncle had tried to vote in Clinton County in 1868. And he went to, it was Adams Township, and asked if he could vote, and they turned him down. Interestingly, later when it was tried in court, they said he was correct. He could have voted. But he had also asked for $1,000 for the fact that he had not voted. And the decision was that he would be given, now, he was declared a legitimate voter who didn't get to vote and had asked for damages of $1,000. And it's in the record there, 1847, they gave him 5 cents.
Yes, Dr. Snarr, I got to tell you, that man's a relative of mine. That's the Jeffers you're talking about, the Jeffers thing, right?
No, but you told me about your story, and I'll tell you
Well,
about it.
I had a relative that they were people that were very light skinned, and they came from
Oh,
Ohio.
yeah.
I mean,
yes.
from Virginia to Ohio in the 1840s, and they tried to vote, and they actually went to court, and they got something like a nickel, like you're right, or 10 cents, for this whole thing. But this one guy, there's a case. His name is Jeffries or Jeffers, because the family name keeps shifting. He's a relative, and there's a huge family of Jeffers that come from Virginia, who were in South Carolina, North Carolina, moved to Ohio. Eventually, my group ended up in Iowa in 1848.
Mhm.
So
Wow.
I think that's the trial you're talking about sounds very similar to the one that I know about.
Very interesting.
Well, and having heard some of the research that you've done, Professor Snarr and some of the other professors that I've heard about from the University of Dayton, and the overabundance of Klan members in Ohio, and obviously some of the things we've heard from previous speakers about the unwelcoming neighbors that folks would have had. I imagine that goes towards your point, Peggy, of just being a tough place to live for folks. And obviously hearing about some of the places up north, and you talk about the poor quality of the land, hard to make a living and pay taxes on a smaller piece of land that isn't as good for farming. So probably a number of factors that contributed to that. So we are past 8:30 now. So I'm going to wind us up. I again want to offer my sincere and deep gratitude to Peggy Mills Warner and to Neil Snarr for the sharing of their wisdom, their research, their experience, and their stories that they brought here to us. A great ending to this series that we've offered. I also want to offer tremendous gratitude to all of you for being here. I don't know how many of you made it to all three of them, but we appreciate all of you. Thank you all for being here. I guess also a special thanks to Andy for helping with the technology with Peggy and her side of the story. I wish you all a wonderful rest of your evening, a wonderful rest of your Lenten journey. And if you have interest in learning more about these topics or other work of the Archdiocese, please let me know, or Sister Christine Pratt, who works out in the eastern part of our diocese. She's out there doing work as well. And we're always happy to work with you and to learn more from your stories and bring people together. So thank you again, everyone, especially Peggy and Neil, and bid you all a great good night.